So I want you to imagine just for a second that you are building a massive suspension bridge.
Okay.
And the engineers come to you and say, they say they're just going to base the structural integrity of this bridge on, good vibes.
Right. Just a general feeling of affection for the steel cables.
Exactly. A general warm feeling for the materials. I mean, you would run for your life
Oh, absolutely.
because we demand absolute mathematical precision for our bridges, right? You calculate the tensile strength of the cables, you measure the load-bearing capacity of the concrete.
You test the aerodynamic stability in a wind tunnel?
Yes, you do all of that because a failure in the architecture means a catastrophic collapse. And yet, when it comes to the most vital, truly load-bearing structures of our actual lives,
Our friendship.
our friendships, our relational networks, we completely abandon this rigor. We just wing it.
We completely wing it. It's actually terrifying when you stop and think about it.
It is. We retreat into this shallow sentimentality. We are essentially trying to construct the most important architecture of our entire existence without a blueprint. And honestly, without even understanding the materials we're using.
And that is a massive structural vulnerability. I mean,
Ah.
most people carry this around every single day without even realizing it.
Right.
We navigate these social networks using an entirely inadequate vocabulary. We conflate mere physical proximity or maybe just shared amusement with the profound weight of true connection.
Yes, exactly.
We completely lack a serious diagnostic framework to differentiate the fragile scaffolding in our lives from the actual load-bearing pillars.
Which is wild.
It is. And because we lack that framework, we are genuinely shocked when a relationship just collapses under the weight of a life crisis. We don't realize it was never structurally designed to hold that weight in the first place.
Which is precisely why this deep dive is designed as a severe diagnostic tool. For you, the listener tuning in right now, we are going to challenge you to look at your own relational life.
Your contacts, your colleagues, your closest confidants.
All of them. We want you to evaluate them through a highly critical, almost mathematical lens. Because, look, we are not interested in shallow, modern self-help life hacks today.
No, absolutely not.
And we are certainly not treating ancient philosophy as some, quaint historical artifact that you just admire in a museum.
Right. This is a live diagnostic.
Our mission today is to systematically deconstruct the relational architecture presented by Aristotle, specifically in books 8 and 9 of his Nicomachean Ethics.
We're going to evaluate the structural integrity of human connection through the lens of objective moral teleology.
But to even begin that evaluation, we have to establish the conceptual anchor of Aristotle's entire ethical system, right? Everything he writes about friendship hinges on this one specific concept.
Yes, the concept of eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia, which is, well, tell us why the modern translation fails us here.
Right, so that word is frequently, and I would say very weakly, translated into English simply as happiness.
Which is a terrible translation.
It is incredibly misleading. Because in modern English, happiness implies a fleeting emotional state, You eat a really good meal, you feel happy, you watch a funny movie, you're happy.
Right, it's a mood.
Exactly. But for Aristotle, eudaimonia is so much heavier than a mood. It is better understood as human flourishing.
Flourishing.
Yes. It is the active, optimal functioning of the human soul in accordance with perfect virtue over the course of a complete lifetime.
Over a complete lifetime.
Wow. It is an objective state of being. It is not a subjective feeling.
Okay, and crucial to achieving that objective state of flourishing is Aristotle's definition of humanity, right? This idea of the zoon politikon.
Yes. The human being as a political, or more accurately, an inherently social animal. This is absolutely foundational to his entire framework.
And it immediately shatters the modern illusion of the radically autonomous individual. I mean, we live in a culture that completely idolizes the self-made person.
Oh, the lone wolf archetype.
The lone wolf. The person who doesn't need anybody, who built their empire alone. But for Aristotle, that is a complete myth. True self-sufficiency literally cannot be achieved in isolation.
It's a structural impossibility.
Right. A solitary life is structurally deficient. If you are going to achieve eudaimonia, you are fundamentally reliant on the external architecture of the polis, the city-state.
And specifically, within that polis, you are reliant on the intricate web of philia, which is friendship.
You literally cannot fulfill your human potential alone.
You cannot.
Yeah.
I mean, Aristotle would argue that a human being living completely outside of a social framework is either a beast or a god. but they're certainly not functioning as a human.
So if we need this external network, this philia, to even be human, we have to map out its structural taxonomy.
Right. And Aristotle refuses to treat friendship as just a monolithic entity. He doesn't just say friendship and leave it at that.
He categorizes it.
He does. He categorizes it by identifying the specific objects of love that drive the connection. He argues that all human affection is drawn toward one of three distinct objects: the useful, the pleasant, or the good.
Okay, so this gives us his famous triadic teleology. 3 distinct species of friendship. Let's break down that first tier, because honestly, I think this is where a massive percentage of our modern interactions live.
Oh, without a doubt.
Friendships of utility. So for the listener, think about your own life right now. Think about your business networking contacts,
Your strategic political alliances at work.
the person you carpool with, or, even just the neighbor who has the really good snowblower.
Right, exactly.
These are purely transactional bonds. The driving mechanism here is not an admiration for the other person's inherent character.
No, you aren't marveling at their moral excellence when you ask to borrow the snowblower.
Exactly. You are making an appraisal of the profit or the practical benefit that they provide to your life.
And Aristotle is brilliantly unsentimental about this category. He observes that in a utility friendship, the parties do not actually love each other in any deep ontological sense.
They love the advantage.
Yes, they love the advantage they derive from the association. Consequently, these bonds are highly volatile.
Highly volatile, because the structural integrity of the relationship is entirely dependent on external variables.
Variables that are constantly shifting. The moment the utility vanishes, the moment you change jobs, the moment the business deal closes, or you just move to a different neighborhood, the friendship dissolves almost instantly.
And the crucial point here, I think, is that there is no malice in this dissolution, right?
Not at all.
There's no dramatic betrayal. It's not a falling out. The contract simply expires. It's literally like a lease running out.
That's a great way to put it. He notes this is particularly common among those pursuing profit. It is a relationship of mutual use. Interestingly, he also observes that this tier of friendship is highly prevalent among the elderly.
Really? Why the elderly?
Because as people age, they often require more practical, physical assistance to just navigate daily life, making utility a primary driver of their social interactions.
That makes sense. But regardless of age, the core reality remains. The relationship is tethered to something external to the actual people involved.
Exactly. Which brings us naturally to the second tier, friendships of pleasure.
Okay, so in Tier 2, the transactional currency shifts. We move away from practical material utility and we move to emotional or sensory gratification.
Right. These are the bonds fueled by shared amusement, aesthetic alignment, or just immediate dopamine hits.
So think about the people you attend concerts with, or the really witty companion who makes long dinner parties bearable.
Or the teammates on your recreational softball league.
Yes, Aristotle observes that this tier is the default relational mode of the young.
And by young, he essentially means those whose lives are primarily guided by immediate passions.
Look and taste.
Exactly. Shifting tastes and the pursuit of sensory enjoyment. Now, it is important to note that friendships of pleasure often feel intensely intimate in the moment.
Oh, absolutely. When you are laughing uncontrollably with someone at a bar at 2 a.m., or you're sharing the adrenaline of a live sports match, it completely mimics the depth of a profound bond.
It feels like the real thing. But Aristotle argues they are just as structurally fragile as friendships of utility.
Because the object of love is fundamentally unstable.
Precisely. The object of love is the shared pleasure. As an individual matures, as their personal tastes naturally evolve, or, and this is a critical diagnostic test, as they enter a season of suffering where they can no longer participate in the shared amusement, the bond simply evaporates.
It's the golf buddy test.
The golf buddy test.
Yeah, if the entire architecture of your friendship is built on playing golf together on Saturdays and then, you severely injure your back and you can never play again, the friendship rarely survives.
Right, because the shared object is gone. Both Tier 1 and Tier 2 are what Aristotle categorizes as accidental friendships.
Accidental, meaning the connection doesn't penetrate to the core essence of who the person is. You love them for an incidental quality, their usefulness or their humor, not their essential self.
That is the perfect way to frame it. The love is conditional on the accident of their utility or their pleasantness.
Which leaves us looking for something that isn't accidental, and that brings us to the absolute apex of his taxonomy.
Perfect friendship, or the friendship of virtue.
The gold standard of human connection. This bond exists strictly between individuals who are equal in moral excellence.
And in this third tier, the object of love is finally the inherent goodness of the other person.
You wish for their good entirely for their own sake, not for any secondary dividend they pay out to you.
Exactly. You aren't friends with them because they can get you a promotion.
And you aren't friends with them just because they make you laugh. You are friends with them because of who they are.
And this is where we really must draw a sharp distinction in the Greek terminology, because honestly, modern language completely fails us here. Perfect friendship is not a pathos.
A pathos, meaning a passive feeling.
Right. It is not a passive, fleeting emotion. It is not a sudden wave of warm affection that just washes over you.
Yeah.
Aristotle argues that perfect friendship is a hexis.
Okay, a hexis. Let's
Yeah.
unpack that for the listener. A hexis is an acquired, enduring state of character.
Yes. It's a structural disposition.
It's like a muscle that has been broken down and rebuilt over years of rigorous training.
That is exactly it. It is a deeply ingrained moral state. You cannot simply decide to have a perfect friendship on a Tuesday.
Right. You can't just manifest it.
You cannot manufacture it through a weekend retreat or a really deep conversation over coffee. Because it is a hexis, it requires what Aristotle terms energia.
Energia, which means active exercise or actualization.
Yes, you must actively, continuously practice the friendship, and this active practice requires
Sissin.
which translates to a shared existence, or literally living together.
Which brings us to my favorite quote in the text. The text famously notes that you cannot truly know someone until you have eaten a quantity of salt together.
It is such a brilliant, ancient idiom.
I love it so much. It implies sitting across a table, sharing the mundane daily sustenance of life, day in and day out. Intimacy, immense amounts of time, and shared domestic or civic life are non-negotiable structural requirements for this Tier 3 bond to exist.
You cannot have a perfect friendship from a distance.
You cannot.
You must witness the other person making moral choices under pressure over a long period of time. You have to see how they handle grief,
How they manage their wealth.
how they treat their inferiors. The hexes must be observed and actively engaged with.
But wait, I want to push back on this rigid stratification for a second. Let me jump in here.
Go ahead.
Aristotle presents these three tiers, utility, pleasure, and virtue, as these remarkably distinct categories. But think about how human relationships actually develop in the real world.
Okay.
Let's apply our architectural analogy again. Think of utility and pleasure as the initial scaffolding used to construct a building. When you first enter a new university or, say, a new corporate workplace, you naturally form utility bonds just to survive the environment. You find the person who knows how to use the copy machine.
You find the person who knows how to navigate the office politics.
Exactly. And you form pleasure bonds to make the long hours tolerable. You find the person who shares your sarcastic sense of humor.
Right, the person you can complain with.
Right. So, is it not entirely possible that over years of shared proximity, over years of eating that proverbial salt in the break room, this initial scaffolding can organically fossilize into the load-bearing pillars of virtue?
It's an interesting thought.
Does Aristotle's taxonomy actually allow for upward mobility? Or are we structurally trapped in the tier where the relationship originated?
That introduces a highly sophisticated structural question. From a strict Aristotelian perspective, time and proximity alone are utterly insufficient to convert scaffolding into a pillar.
Really? So just being around someone for 10 years isn't enough?
No, the sheer accumulation of shared pleasures, like 1,000 inside jokes over a decade, does not chemically transmute into moral virtue.
Wow.
For a friendship of utility or pleasure to ascend to a perfect friendship of virtue, there must be a fundamental ontological shift in the object of love.
Meaning the underlying motive of the relationship has to be completely rewritten.
Yes.
The foundation basically has to be swapped out while the building is still standing.
Precisely. And for that to happen, the individuals themselves must first acquire the internal hexes of virtue independently. If two business partners suddenly prioritize each other's moral excellence over their quarterly profit margins, the relationship has evolved. But only because the individuals have evolved.
So they changed first, and then the friendship changed.
Exactly. Aristotle would certainly agree that perfect friendships often contain utility and pleasure. I mean, good men are indeed both highly useful and deeply pleasant to one another.
Right, it's not a miserable relationship.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But the utility and pleasure are byproducts. They are the exhaust fumes of the virtue, not the engine. The scaffolding doesn't magically become the pillar. Rather, the scaffolding is removed once the pillar of virtue has been successfully erected beneath it.
Okay, so if we've got these three tiers of friendship acting as the external building blocks, we have to ask, what is happening on the inside?
The internal architecture.
Right, because it seems to me like you cannot possibly build that tier 3 perfect friendship if the person you're building it with is fundamentally broken internally. The external architecture relies entirely on the internal psychological substrate of the individual.
It does.
And this brings us to a concept that is incredibly counterintuitive to the modern ear, what Aristotle calls philautia, or self-love.
Oh, this is where Book 9 of the Ethics becomes brilliantly subversive, especially for our current cultural moment.
Yes, let's get into this. Because in contemporary discourse, self-love is almost exclusively treated as a monolith, right? And it usually carries a very soft therapeutic connotation.
Bubble baths and spa days.
Exactly. But Aristotle takes a scalpel to the concept. He deconstructs it entirely, establishing a severe dichotomy between vulgar self-love and noble self-love.
And we really need to dissect the vulgar first, because this sounds exactly like what we see marketed to us constantly.
It really is. So vulgar philautia is the default operating system for the vast majority of people, according to Aristotle. He defines it as the grasping for a disproportionate share of material wealth, social honors, and bodily pleasures.
It is the relentless gratification of the irrational element of the soul.
But what is truly fascinating is his psychological diagnosis of the vulgar self-lover. He doesn't just say they are greedy. He says the soul of such a person is rent by faction.
Rent by faction, like a country in the middle of a brutal civil war.
That's the exact image. They are constantly at war with themselves. Their base appetites drag them in one direction, while their rational mind pulls them in another.
They indulge a craving, and then they are immediately flooded with remorse.
Yes. They hate their own weakness, yet they continue to indulge it. And Aristotle concludes that these individuals are utterly incapable of being true friends to others because they are fundamentally hostile to their own internal architecture.
They cannot offer stability to a friend because they have zero internal stability themselves.
And here's the darkest part. He says they actually seek out the company of others just to distract themselves from the misery of their own internal monologue.
Think about how profound that is. If your internal life is a civil war, any friendship you form is just an alliance of convenience to distract you from the battlefield in your own head.
It's chilling. But in stark contrast to this, we have noble self-love. And we need to be very clear here for the listener. Noble philautia is not about repeating affirmations in the mirror.
No.
Or treating yourself. Noble self-love is the rigorous, uncompromising, disciplined pursuit of character excellence. The virtuous man gives himself the most noble things. He awards himself virtue and honorable actions.
Because he obeys the rational principle within him, he desires the same objects with every single part of his soul. His desires and his reason are perfectly aligned.
So there is complete internal unity.
Yes, there is no faction. Aristotle makes this shocking claim that a truly good man must be a self-lover in this highly specific sense, because only by aggressively pursuing his own moral perfection can he be of any actual use to the polis or to a friend.
It's like the airplane safety video. He has to secure his own oxygen mask first, but the oxygen is moral virtue.
That is a perfect analogy, and this internal unity, this total absence of faction, is the absolute prerequisite for the most radical concept in Aristotle's entire relational theory.
The allosatos.
The friend is an allosatos.
The alter ego, or another self. This is where the philosophy gets incredibly deep. Aristotle argues that the friendly feelings you have toward others are actually an extension of the feelings you have for yourself.
Correct. But this raises a really profound epistemological dilemma.
Epistemology being the study of how we know what we know.
Right. So if a man has achieved eudaimonia, if he is truly virtuous, completely internally unified, and theoretically self-sufficient, why does he need a friend at all?
Right. If you are a perfectly self-sufficient system, any outside variable is just a risk.
Exactly. Why not just sit alone on a mountaintop in perfect contemplation of your own virtue? Why invite another person in?
Because human beings, even perfectly virtuous ones, suffer from a structural blindness. We cannot objectively observe our own virtues, our own blind spots, or the true moral weight of our own actions.
We're too close to the subject.
We lack the necessary focal distance to see ourselves clearly. Now, the happy man deeply desires to contemplate good actions. It is the highest function of his intellect. But Aristotle points out that he can do this much more continuously, far more objectively, and significantly more pleasantly by observing the actions of a virtuous friend than by looking only at his own life.
The friend acts as an objective moral mirror.
Precisely. By observing the Alice autos, the individual can accurately perceive goodness, correct his own subtle deviations from the mean, and sustain his orientation toward the chief good. The friend is necessary not for material survival, but for moral sight.
And I have to interject here with a sharp philosophical critique. Let's call it the closed-loop echo chamber problem.
Okay, let's hear it.
If a perfect friend is fundamentally another self, if the absolute primary criteria for this Tier 3 bond is perfect moral symmetry and mutual reflection, isn't Aristotelian philia subtly, perhaps deeply, egocentric?
Egocentric? How so?
Think about it. If I am a highly virtuous man, and I love you strictly because your virtue perfectly mirrors my own, am I not ultimately loving you merely as a vehicle to complete my own moral development?
Oh, wow. I see where you're going.
It seems to lack true self-forgetfulness.
No.
You were just a tool I used to admire my own moral reflection. It feels like an aristocratic narcissism masked as a civic duty.
That is genuinely the most potent critique of the entire Aristotelian system. You are highlighting the inherent centripetal nature of classical Greek philosophical love.
Centripetal meaning.
Meaning it always pulls inward, toward the center, toward the perfection of the self.
Right.
Now, Aristotle would defend his framework by arguing that because the ultimate objective good in the universe is virtue, to love the virtue in another person is to love the most objective reality possible.
Okay.
He would argue it is not narcissistic because the self that is being loved is a self completely surrendered to universal moral excellence.
But the tension is undeniable, right? He loves the virtue in the friend, perhaps significantly more than he loves the friend as a distinct, irreducible, messy human entity.
The individual is almost reduced to a vessel for the virtue, and here is the terrifying structural reality of this system. If the friend's virtue degrades, if they suffer a moral failing, the friendship structurally dissolves.
Such a dance.
The love is entirely conditional upon the maintenance of that moral symmetry. If the mirror cracks, you throw it away.
That is a severe, almost chilling limitation.
It is. But before we fully dismantle that limitation, we need to take Aristotle's diagnostic tool and turn it on our own era. Because as rigid as Aristotle is, his critique of vulgar self-love and utility friendships is arguably more devastatingly relevant today than it was in 4th century BCE Athens.
Oh, without question. Let us transport this classical framework into the modern digital void.
Yes, let's do it.
Because we are currently navigating a cultural landscape defined by a profound, agonizing paradox. We are drowning in an epidemic of hyperconnected loneliness.
Think about your own phone right now. You likely have hundreds, maybe thousands of connections.
We collect these connections like digital trading cards.
We do. We curate vast networks of ambient presence. We know what our high school acquaintances ate for breakfast, yet we are structurally isolated. We are more alone than any generation in recorded history.
And if we apply Aristotle's triadic teleology to modern digital networks, the diagnosis is chilling.
Because it's all Tier 1 and Tier 2.
Exactly. Social media algorithms, professional networking metrics, the entire underlying architecture of the digital sphere inherently collapses human relationships into Tier 1, utility, and Tier 2, pleasure. It is structurally impossible for an algorithm to foster Tier 3 virtue.
We literally treat connection as a currency.
We do. On platforms designed for professional networking, think about LinkedIn, every single interaction is fundamentally transactional.
Oh, completely. You connect with someone because they work at a company you want to apply to, or because they can amplify your personal brand.
It is a pristine, horrifyingly efficient example of utility friendship, optimized for global scale. You don't care about their soul. You care about their network reach.
And on social platforms driven by algorithmic feeds, your Instagrams, your TikToks, the connection is based entirely on the mutual exchange of dopamine, aesthetic signaling, shared outrage, or amusement.
It is the very definition of friendships of pleasure, accelerated to light speed.
And the broader culture actively reinforces this structural collapse. We see a pervasive hyper-individualism that completely rejects Aristotle's premise of the Zoon politikon.
Modern Western psychology frequently prioritizes the radically autonomous individual above all else.
We have universally adopted a therapeutic culture that champions concepts like unconditional self-acceptance as the ultimate internal baseline.
You hear it constantly. You are perfect exactly as you are. Live your truth. Don't let anyone judge you.
Right. But if we frame that modern therapeutic concept through Aristotle's lens, it looks suspiciously, if not exactly, like a massive societal regression into vulgar self-love.
It bypasses the rigorous moral demands of friendship entirely. unconditional self-acceptance, when it is entirely divorced from the active, disciplined pursuit of moral excellence, simply ratifies the soul that is rent by faction.
It demands that our friends accept our lowest appetites, our structural flaws, and our toxic behaviors as our authentic self.
And noble self-love, which we establish as the necessary prerequisite for Tier 3 intimacy, requires the exact opposite.
It requires an uncompromising standard of character that flatly refuses to settle for base gratification.
Let me offer a technological analogy to really clarify what is happening to us here.
Go for it.
Earlier, we discussed the absolute necessity of system, the shared life, the literal eating of salt together over years to form the hexes of perfect friendship.
Right, the proximity requirement.
Modern digital platforms offer us a synthetic simulation of system. We have constant ambient presence. We track our network's real-time geographical movements. We exchange instantaneous micro-affirmations via likes and retweets.
We simulate being together without actually being together.
Exactly. So my question to you is, does this constant algorithmic ambient presence provide a biochemical illusion of intimacy that effectively short-circuits our capacity to do the heavy lifting required for genuine Aristotelian hexes?
Oh, it absolutely short-circuits the process. The digital sphere is engineered to provide the pathos of connection, the fleeting emotional sensation of being seen and acknowledged, without requiring the energia, the active, disciplined exercise of character.
It simulates the psychological reward of Tier 3 intimacy, using the incredibly cheap, disposable materials of Tier 2 pleasure.
Consequently, the individual feels constantly exhausted by social interaction, yet utterly starved of actual relational substance. The algorithmic simulation of the Allos Autos is just a digital funhouse mirror.
A funhouse mirror. That's good.
It reflects our curated avatars back to us, but it never reflects their true moral state. It keeps us trapped in the scaffolding.
So Aristotle provides a devastating, laser-accurate critique of our modern transactional culture.
He does.
But, as we hinted at earlier when discussing the echo chamber problem, his own system harbors profound structural limitations. We have to interrogate the boundaries of his classical framework, particularly its aristocratic exclusivity.
Because if Aristotle is the final word on friendship, most of humanity is structurally locked out.
This is where we must squarely face the historical reality of the Athenian context. Aristotle's perfect friendship is strictly, severely limited. It is fiercely meritocratic. Because this Tier 3 bond requires immense leisure time for philosophical contemplation, shared civic duties, and absolute moral symmetry, it is explicitly restricted to elite, free, wealthy men of high character.
It is the ultimate exclusive club. It structurally excludes women who, in the Athenian context, were denied civic equality and the necessary public life.
And it explicitly, brutally excludes slaves.
Aristotle bluntly states in Book 8 that a master cannot possibly share a friendship with a slave because he defines a slave merely as an animate tool.
There's no common ground, no moral symmetry possible in his worldview between a free man and a tool.
Furthermore, if the moral symmetry or social equality is lost even among the elite, the friendship dissolves.
Even in inherently unequal relationships that Aristotle acknowledges, like a father and a son or a ruler and a subject, he insists on a rigid mathematical proportionality.
Right. The inferior party must render exponentially more honor and love to the superior party to artificially balance the equation.
The entire system is built on a ruthless honor-shame calculus that simply cannot tolerate true asymmetry.
Which brings us to the ultimate transcendent subversion of this entire framework. To fully expose the limits of Aristotelian philia, we have to contrast it with the relational theology of the biblical narrative.
The biblical text presents a fundamentally different architecture for human connection, specifically through the New Testament concept of agape and the Old Testament concept of covenant or berith.
Anchored and cheesed.
Yes, cheesed, which translates roughly to steadfast, self-giving, covenantal loyalty.
And the geometric contrast here is striking. Where Aristotle's philia is centripetal, always drawing inward to a closed, exclusive circle of moral equals biblical agape, is radically centrifugal.
It flows outward.
It deliberately and constantly crosses the boundaries of moral symmetry to embrace the broken, the marginalized, the inferior, and even the actively hostile enemy.
Let's ground this abstract idea in specific textual exegesis. Look at the Old Testament narrative of David and Jonathan in 1 Samuel 18.
This text operates as a direct structural confrontation to the Aristotelian honor-shame calculus.
You have Jonathan, the royal crown prince of Israel. He is the superior in every conceivable socio-political metric.
And you have David, a lowly shepherd boy recently brought into the royal court.
In Aristotle's framework, if a friendship is to exist here at all, David the inferior must render immense, disproportionate honor to Jonathan the superior just to maintain a fragile, unequal bond.
But the narrative aggressively shatters that expectation. The text states that Jonathan loved David as his own soul.
Which is a direct, fascinating echo of the allos autos, the alter ego.
But look at the resulting action. Instead of demanding proportional honor to balance the scales, Jonathan initiates a formal covenant, a berith. And in verse 4, Jonathan physically strips himself of his royal robe, his armor, his sword, and his belt, and he transfers them to the inferior David.
He practically abdicates his socio-political superiority.
He initiates his own personal diminishment, specifically to elevate the inferior party. To the classical Greek mind, this is structural treason.
Utter treason. It violates the math of human flourishing. Jonathan is not loving David because David's royal virtue perfectly mirrors his own. Jonathan is actively surrendering his royal rights out of covenantal, love-cheesed-in, humble submission to God's redemptive plan.
The structural anchor of the relationship has moved completely off of human moral symmetry and onto divine sovereignty.
And this massive subversion reaches its absolute zenith in the New Testament. We have to unpack the exegesis of John chapter 15, verses 12 through 17.
Here, Jesus is speaking to his disciples in the upper room hours before his execution.
The linguistic structure of this specific passage is paramount. If we apply Constantine Campbell's verbal aspect framework to the Greek text here, the theological weight of what is happening becomes incredibly clear.
Okay, let's nerd out on the Greek for a second, break it down.
Jesus issues a direct command: love one another. In the Greek, the verb used here, agapate, is a present imperative.
Now, without getting bogged down in overly dense grammar, what that essentially means is that this love is expected to be an ongoing, habitual, daily practice.
It conveys imperfective aspect with pragmatic proximity. It must define the daily rhythm of the community.
So it is the required active hexes of this new community. It's the new blueprint for the architecture.
Yes. But look closely at what anchors this command. He says, love one another just as I have loved you. The verb he uses for his love toward them, agapiza, is an aorist indicative.
Again, translating this to conversational terms, the aorist tense represents perfective aspect with pragmatic remoteness.
It views his massive act of love as a complete historical whole. It is a snapshot in the past. He is pointing directly to the cross as a finished foundational reality.
And here's the devastating absolute contrast with Aristotle. In Book 9, Aristotle readily claims that a virtuous man will lay down his life for a friend.
But why does he do it?
Exactly, why? Aristotle says he dies to secure tekalon, the supreme prize of personal, historical honor for himself.
Even in the moment of death, the Aristotelian hero is acquiring maximum virtue for his own soul. It is still centripetal.
But Christ subverts this entirely. He lays down his life not to secure personal honor or philosophical perfection, but to redeem the ungodly.
He is the ultimate ontological superior, the divine willingly sacrificing himself for the infinitely inferior and morally broken.
And in verse 15, the structural transition is explicitly marked by Jesus. He uses the perfect active indicative verb ereka, meaning, I have called you friends. With that statement, he permanently elevates them from the status of slaves doulos to the status of friendsfulness.
This single staggering act utterly destroys Aristotle's rigid claim that friendship cannot exist between a master and a slave. Christ spans the infinite ontological gap between the divine and the human, not by demanding proportional honor to balance the equation, but through a cross-shaped act of completely self-giving grace.
And we see the immediate real-world sociological fallout of this new architecture in Paul's letter to Philemon.
Yes, Paul commands a Roman master to welcome his runaway slave back into his home. No longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother.
The classical meritocratic framework is entirely dismantled by this new theology.
Yeah.
Let me offer a physics analogy to try and capture the sheer magnitude of this paradigm shift.
I love your analogies. Go ahead.
Aristotelian philia operates very much like gravitational mass. It can only pull equal high-density objects into its exclusive, stable orbit.
Okay, follow up.
If a low-density object, a person without immense virtue or wealth, enters that gravitational field, it is either instantly crushed by the pressure or violently cast out of the orbit.
Right.
Christian agape, however, operates like a star. It radiates heat and light outward into the empty, freezing void, warming objects completely independent of the mass or merit of those objects. The star does not require the asteroid to be luminous in order to shine upon it.
That analogy perfectly captures the transition from a closed meritocratic system to an open, grace-centered system. And the early church fathers recognized this profound tension immediately.
Oh, absolutely. Augustine of Hippo, in his famous Confessions, provides what is arguably the ultimate patristic synthesis of this problem.
Augustine deeply understood and appreciated the beauty of classical friendship, but having suffered the agonizing sudden death of a very close friend in his youth, he issued a severe existential critique of Aristotle's framework.
He realized the profound danger of treating a human being as an allos autos without a divine anchor.
Yes, Augustine argued that loving another mortal human being as another self, without anchoring that love in the eternal, unchanging divine, inevitably leads to relational idolatry, and ultimately to profound existential despair.
Think about the structural reality. If your entire architecture of meaning is built squarely upon the fragile, mortal virtue of a human peer, the structure will eventually, inevitably collapse under the weight of either physical death or moral failure.
Humans break.
Yeah.
There is crack.
They do. Augustine concludes that true friendship is only structurally eternal when the individuals are woven together not just by shared virtue, but by the Holy Spirit.
So let us try to synthesize the massive trajectory of this deep dive today.
Yes, let's bring it all together. We began by examining our modern, highly sentimental approach to relationships, realizing we desperately needed a severe diagnostic tool.
We utilized Aristotle's rigorous architectural blueprint to map out the fragile, temporary scaffolding of utility and pleasure. We explored how those transactional bonds dissolve, and we moved past them to discover the load-bearing pillars of perfect, virtue-based friendship.
From there, we ventured inward, exploring the profound psychological necessity of noble self-love, the requirement of a unified soul, and the epistemological necessity of the friend acting as an objective moral mirror, the allos autos.
We took that ancient, severe diagnostic and applied it directly to our modern digital void. We diagnosed our current epidemic of hyperconnected loneliness as a tragic structural conflation of algorithmic utility masquerading as deep intimacy.
We expose the modern therapeutic illusion of unconditional self-acceptance as a devastating barrier to the rigorous hexes required for true connection.
And finally, we collided Aristotle's aristocratic, highly exclusive limits against the transcendent subversion of biblical agape.
We witnessed the cold honor-shame calculus shattered by the covenantal loyalty of Jonathan, and we saw the infinite meritocratic gap bridged forever by Christ, who laid down his life for his enemies, entirely redefining the architecture of connection through sacrificial grace.
Which brings us back, finally, to you, the listener. It brings us back to the X-ray machine, to the structural evaluation of your own life and your own relationships.
We have transitioned from the rigorous mechanics of human flourishing to the absolute mystery of unmerited grace. And I want to leave you with a final, intellectually provocative thought to mull over as you look at your contacts list today.
Aristotle argued with immense logical force that true friendship demands absolute equality. The structural integrity relies entirely on reciprocity and moral symmetry.
But the transcendent biblical framework we just explored is built entirely on the superior, willingly and joyfully sacrificing for the inferior.
If that is the ultimate, truest architecture of love in the universe, perhaps the greatest barrier to deep connection in our modern, hyper-individualistic lives is not our failure to find a perfect moral equal.
We spend so much time looking for the perfect friend who mirrors our own perceived excellence. But perhaps the true diagnostic failure is our profound, prideful refusal to be the inferior party.
Perhaps it is our absolute terror of having nothing to offer to the transaction, our dread of being a burden.
And therefore, our stubborn inability to simply, humbly accept the unearned grace of a friend.